This is Madge from Bethel Health and Healing Network. We are a small charity, and the message that we want to get across is that we are a worthwhile charity to support. So it's trying to get people to donate, not just financially, but to reach out to more volunteers, to for time, to collaborate with partners, that sort of thing. But I think because we're a small charity and we don't really have we do have a marketing person who's part-time, but we don't really have the resources to kind of push it the way that we want to. But that's the message that we're trying to get across. And why should anybody care? Because we are worthwhile and we're working with the most vulnerable people in society that without our help would really suffer. And obviously, as a charity, or a third sector organisation, we're actually supporting the statutory sector in reaching these vulnerable people that they would never be able to reach.
Excellent. So, I mean, some really good messaging in there, isn't there? I like, again, so there's two different messages almost, isn't it? So, not just the financial part, but around getting people to donate time, and give something from themselves into that project as well. And absolutely, a really worthwhile cause as well. And it's about how do we drill into that, and really get people to understand why, from their own point of view. So I think, when we talked about that what's in it for me factor earlier on, I know that might sound a little bit crass being, a charity organisation, but actually, when people can think about what they get as well and how they feel and what it does for them, and we take them on that journey, that can really play a part in that. So that's brilliant. Thanks very much for that. Really appreciate it. Thank you. So there's a number of different types of messages, and I'm sure for others on the call as well, there's a whole plethora of different things that we're wanting to communicate. And it's thinking about what's the right mechanism to do it, what's the right tool to use at the right time, what is it we get back from people. But there really is lying underneath at the core, we want to have something from people. We want people to do something. We either want them to change an approach, we want them to do something different, or we want them to think about something in a slightly different way. So we really do need to balance off what is it I'm telling them versus why should they listen to the message that we're actually trying to convey as we go through this. Apologies if you can hear any noise in the background. I've got an overexcitable 5-month-old puppy at the moment, so I do apologise for that one. So first things first, when we start and think about the point that we're putting across, the title of the slide there, around pinpoint accuracy. So it's starting to think about what is it that you need people to know versus what you'd like them to know. I want to talk a little bit around that in the sense that actually think about the message that you're sending out. What is it that you need to communicate? So think about what's absolutely vital, what's the message you need to get across, and what is it that people have to understand versus, and if we could cover all this stuff as well, that would be great. Sometimes a message can be lost because we surround it by a whole host of other pieces of information and we're never quite sure what people are taking out from it. If you think about, your own personal lives, whenever you've had a conversation with friends, family, anything like that, there'll be a point where you've told a story and it gets replayed to you at a later date and it's very different, or somebody's taken part of it that wasn't really key. So it's really about narrowing down onto that part around what is this message going to achieve. So really defining that up front. And then starting to think about what do we want people to do, as a result of receiving that communication. What's the key thing? What's the key action, that we're looking for people to take? So is it a message that's just going to inform people? And if it is, then that's great. So let's make sure we've got all of the information in there they need, and we shouldn't be expecting anything back to us. We shouldn't be expecting phone calls, emails, follow-up communication from anyone, because actually it was just to provide them with information. Or is it a call to action? So some of the examples that we heard, shared at the start of this call were around people, donating time and, finances, around charity work and that kind of thing. So there's a definite call to action in there for people as well. And it's about being explicit around what we need people to do. So really calling that out, really making sure that people understand that there is an action that I need you to take following this. And then the third point that's on there, do you actually need people to respond? So that's always an interesting one in the sense that I see communications go out and there's a lot of information, that I receive, on a day-to-day basis, and I'll sit and read through it and think, well, that's great, really good message, I understand a lot, but I'm not sure if I need to respond. I'm not sure if I need to go back to somebody. I don't know whether or not I should be doing anything specific after this. So if there is those kind of actions or those kind of things that we need people to do, then let's really state that, let's really put ourselves in a place where we're in that position where we're demonstrating to people that we really do need them to respond. We really do, encourage that communication back with us. And in a little while, we're going to have a look at that two-way process and how we can open some of that stuff up as well. Think about how much of the communication you're putting in there is important to your audience. Now, this is an interesting one because I think, from our own point of view within the organisations we work with and for, we can think about so much stuff that we would want to communicate. There can be so much information that we want to put out there, or there can be so much detail that we feel we should be giving to people so that people have got that full rounded picture of what's going on. But what we need to think about is what's actually important to them. What are they actually going to grasp hold of? What are they actually going to do something with? Yeah. So it's about being really concise. And sometimes we need to be quite almost brutal with ourselves as we look at the message and think about, is the stuff in there that I'm just hoping people take on? Or am I really sort of drilling down to what's important on this particular communication that I'm sending through? And then the final point is around covering all eventualities. So let's make sure we detail fully what it is that's going on. So if there's a couple of different calls to action for people, let's call it out that we need maybe 1, 2, 3, or 4, however many it might be actions that we need them to take. Or if we're looking for different things to happen as a result and not necessarily people coming back to us and communicating, what is it? What would we expect to see as a result? So let's start and think about, in that perfect world, the communications landed, people are doing exactly what it is that we want them to do. What would that look like? So start and form that vision. So before we even put pen to paper, or we even start to type an email, a message, create a mail shot, social media post, whatever it might be, is thinking about that end result and working backwards from there around so what drove that? What were the kind of things that went in there to really give us that great result? So to do a lot of that stuff and to get into a lot of that space, thinking about some of the examples that's been shared, we do need to think about doing something more than just communicating. So it's more than just a mail shot. It's also appealing to people's motivations, and it's appealing to people's, sort of desires to achieve something different. And we call that the what's in it for me factor. So again, just to open it up as a question to all of you, when we talk about a what's in it for me factor, what are the kind of things that come to mind for you? What might the what's in it for me factor mean?
I think for me, Andy, this is about, by doing this, what will I gain from it?
Yeah.
Will I gain more business from it? Will I gain more awareness from other people on this? Is that what I'm after? Yeah,
absolutely. It's, what does it do for me? Yeah, so what do I get out of it? What changes for me? So if I look at, think about yourself in any personal example. So the challenge I've set myself for 2022, I say challenge I've set myself, I'm too far off into it now, is I'm running the London Marathon in October for charity. And so, one of the things I thought was that, yes, we can raise funds for charity and that's great, but why am I doing it? Well, actually, it's really good for my mental health and for my physical well-being. The major driving factors for me. There's some of the things that I'm personally getting as a result of training for that. So there's some of the key things that are in it for me alongside, the main cause, which is, raising funds for different charities as I do it. So that's the kind of factors that are in there. So it's thinking about things that appeal to the individual in their own right. So we think about what's the specific benefit to that individual? What can they gain? By doing this. And we talk about people donating their time, to assist us with some charity work. It's kind of think about, so what's the self-enrichment, that they're going to get out of that? What's the difference that they're going to make to other people's lives, and how will that present itself? We think about the driver to take action, so it's almost that do this and, this is, so there's something else that's in there. It's not just we want you to. We'd like you to. It's actually, we'd like you to do this, and this is what you'd see. This is what this looks like. You think about a win-win scenario. Whatever it is that we're trying to communicate, if we're asking something of people, our win is getting them to respond in that way. So brilliant. As individuals, we're also looking for that win back ourselves as well. What does that look like? Yeah, so what's that win for them? How would that sit there? Thinking about people's chances to grow and learn, thinking about how they can move as an individual, how they can develop more. And it might also just bring them some increased positivity and benefit in their own lives as well. So it's thinking about all of these different kind of things. Whenever we prepare a mail shot, a social media post, it's about what are people going to get as a result of interacting with me across this different message. Some of the things that that we might want to reference, so there's development opportunities for people. Perhaps it's a chance for someone to get involved in an area of work or in a sector that they've never been involved in before. So think about some of the messages that you've sent out in recent weeks or months. Were there any opportunities for people to develop, be it from a professional or social aspect? What were the different kind of things that people could have got involved in there? Work-life balance is a really important one. If we think about what the last, frightened to say, but almost 2 years have been like, throughout the pandemic, if we think about how people's work lives have shifted and how that balance has shifted to people now working, as I am today, from home more predominantly, and that kind of thing. What's happened to work-life balance? Some people have found that they're working incredibly long hours because, I'm already here, I might as well just carry on, and I'm losing some of that interaction with others within my life. Whereas if I responded to your message and I did something else and donated my time to support others, actually that gives me a greater sense of well-being. That gives me a greater sense of balance. And it demonstrates to me that I can break that routine of just being on that treadmill constantly, from one place to another, just working constantly day in, day out. I go to bed, I get up, my office is here at home and I've got to work again. Actually, I've got a reason to break that. So it gives me that greater sense of balance. So it's almost not just helping, yourselves as, a charity organisation, in the example we were given, but it's also doing something for that individual's own well-being as well. There could be an element of financial gain in there for people. Sometimes you'll see that linked with a development opportunity. So if somebody's growing professionally, if somebody's gaining new skills or different ways of working or new abilities, then that can sometimes lead to, improvements in their own working conditions or, a change in job role that might bring some element of financial gain. If that's the case, then let's call that out because it is a motivator for people. For others, it could just be an opportunity to give something back. So there's that sense that actually I'm no longer just working, in a corporate environment, or I'm just doing something for the profit. I constantly seem to be looking at profit and loss, or I'm constantly thinking commercially, but it's my opportunity to just do something that means I am giving to others. And it gives me that, sense of achievement that I've done that. And then the final one that's on there, and one that I certainly think shouldn't be underestimated, is around that increased engagement with any particular activity. So if we think about the messages that you send out to either clients, colleagues, members of the public, whatever that might be, the more we can engage with others, the more we can get them involved in the message that we're talking about. We've got opportunities to really drive these higher levels of engagement, and higher levels of engagement bring us massive increases in productivity, bring us massive increases in success, and a greater chance of landing the next message as people really sort of recognize the benefit they got from the first time. So looking at these kind of examples here, I'll ask this one out to all of you as a group, so just be keen to see. Are there some examples that you see that you could roll into some of these in some of your communications, or is there some of this that you've tried to do before?
Anyone have a view on this? Thinking about why you would have this as a plan? Thinking about what's in it for me. I mean, I know, Andy, for me, certainly it's about development opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I would say actually all of those, actually, Andy. Certainly with increasing engagement for me, definitely financial gain.
Yeah, happy days. So sometimes, it can be a blend of all of them. It's not to say that you can only use the one, but it's just thinking about what some of those drivers are for individuals, isn't it? Thinking about what really sits for them, and what works for people. So it's not necessarily that you've got to choose one, but it's thinking about what could be in it for somebody. What might somebody get out of it? The more we can really articulate that within our message, the greater the chance we've got of people buying into it and doing something with it in the longer term as well. Okay. So what makes communication work? Let's go right back before we start to look at tools and mechanisms and different processes we could follow. Let's actually look at what makes it work. So if you start on the left-hand side of the screen there, we're a sender. So I have some information that I want to impart. So I'm going to move to that box in the middle at the top there. I'm going to communicate it. Somebody's going to receive it. And then hopefully we'll get into that bottom box where they feed back to me as the sender. What happens quite often is that we send a message, or we think about sending a message. We know we've got information to impart. We communicate it, it's received by somebody, and it closes off at that point. We don't necessarily get that return we'd be looking for. We don't necessarily get that feedback, or we don't necessarily get the response that we're expecting. So, and again, I'm not asking you to shout this out on the call, but if you think about the communications you've sent over the last sort of few months, has every single one landed brilliantly? Has every single one brought you, the kind of results you were expecting? Have you had the levels of engagement that you would have expected to see? Or have there been some gaps in and around that? And if there's been some gaps in and around it, usually what we find is it's because the feedback part hasn't happened. So what we really need to do is think about how we open up on that feedback section and how we build that within there into any of our communications. It's not enough just to put the message out there. Yeah, it'll, granted, that'll allow us to put a tick on the to-do list and say we've done it. I've sent the communication out and I'm really pleased with how it looked and I'm really pleased with how it was worded. But unless we get that feedback through, it can be challenging to try and understand in terms of, how well it's been received. Has it driven any call to action? Has it done something for people? That can be a big miss for us. So what we really need to do is make sure we've got that full cycle in operation, because without that feedback, without that interaction between sender and receiver working both ways, we really do run the risk of not communicating in a way that sort of, facilitates that active conversation for us. So what are the benefits of doing it? Some of these I've already touched on already. Is that one, we can identify that communication's landed. So I'm not just talking about a read receipt. Yeah, so I'm sure we've done that where we look at, how many times has my email actually been received? Has it been opened? There's enough of those analytics available now via sort of, various email clients or different email tools, that kind of thing. We can see whether or not, communication's actually being received by people. But that only tells us part of the story. It almost only tells us that, yes, the email was right and someone clicked on it. It doesn't really, give us anything else. If we bring a two-way process into this, and if we start to open ourselves up to wider communication and wider conversation with people, we've got opportunities for instant feedback. So think about the very call that we're on here right now. I've stopped 2 or 3 times already to ask you questions because I'm instantly trying to look at sort of, is what I'm talking about making sense? Can you relate an example to it? Because that helps me in terms of being able to make sure that we're talking about the right things on that session. Without that feedback back and forth between, myself and us here, all of us here on the call today, this just turns into me rabbiting on for 15 minutes to you saying thanks very much, and then I'll go and make a coffee, which doesn't really lend itself, to us getting anything out of it. So with that instant feedback and that open communication between 2 different parties is really vital, to get that instant feedback. When we open ourselves up to feedback of that nature, we get into a space where we can really generate some new ideas. So sometimes we can shy away from feedback. I know I've been guilty of that in the past, where I might not want to know. I'm not convinced it's necessarily landed in the right way, so I'll just not ask, and then I can shrink away, and I don't need to worry about it. But actually, if we can be brave and we can ask people for, what worked, what didn't work, what would you like to see change, what would be more useful to you, what's more information for you to have, they will suddenly give us different ideas. They will suddenly give you different thoughts, opinions that you can really utilize to help create something very, very different in the future. And the more we start to, create those different ideas, those different ways of working, we evolve our message, we evolve our strategy, and we find ourselves in a place where suddenly we're getting more and more feedback through from people, and we're open to receiving it. And at the same time, we're getting greater buy-in, we're having greater levels of success, and all because we allowed ourselves to communicate more openly with others. And the final one that's on there is that if you can open to that instantaneous communication, or you put a call to action on there that's, even if you're not taking part, please let us know what you thought of this message, that kind of thing, people will come back and they'll identify certain things that they either found challenging, they found difficult, they weren't sure about, didn't really work for them, whatever it might be. So before it becomes a major problem for you, your organization, or your clients, we can take action immediately and we can do something about that. And the more we start to play into that space, the greater the opportunity we've got of overcoming those challenges, getting that feedback, and really driving a positive response from people. Does that make sense in terms of that two-way process? I got a thumbs up, so I'm taking the thumbs up. I'm happy with that. Thanking you kindly. That's beautiful. So how do we bring two-way communication to life? Well, there's a variety of different ways. I mean, there are two on there that are really, easy. So you've got telephone contact, so I can pick up the phone and talk to someone. If anybody's got any hints and tips on how you can get teenagers to do that, that would be spectacular. Ours only seem to communicate with us via text now, even when they're in the other room. So if anyone's got any hints and ideas, please send them through. But yes, we can talk to people on the telephone. So that's one way that we can do it. If we think about email contacts, so this could be a call to action for people. So it's rather than them just receiving a mail shot, but maybe there's links on there to get in touch, talk to me, this is what I want to hear. So we're really opening it for them and inviting them. We could think about group forums. So think about the session that we're on today, and the way in which this is working. I'm hoping, as we go through, we'll get into, a Q&A at the end of this session, but there's already been that back and forth between us all already today. And this kind of group forum allows us to share some of those ideas, some of those best practice points, and really build on those with each other at all times. So group forums can be an incredibly powerful way of getting into that space. So for those of you working in organizations where, you've got a number of employees, think about your employee representatives. If you've got a high number of employees, then it might be that you only want to speak to specific reps, so that we're not constantly trying to run meetings of 20, 30 people or whatever it might be. Or it might be that we want to bring everybody together, talk to us, share your ideas. What is it that you want to go through? I want to learn more. I want to know more from your perspective. What is it that you've got to say to me? Or even survey data. We can go out and we can ask people questions. We can be really specific about what works in this message for you. What do you understand it to be? What is it that you'd like to see different? We can really target our message to make sure that people know what feedback we're actually seeking. So rather than just having that general net that we spread wide around tell me everything, I can target it in specific ways. So my challenge to all of you on this one today is, not necessarily to change the world this afternoon with your communication. If you want to, by all means, go ahead and do it. But it's to start and think of, straight away around sort of how might I do something like this? So let's think about, if it's survey data, what might be the top 3 questions I'd want to ask people? What would be the top 3 things I'd want to know? Or if it was to run a group forum like this, if I was to put a webinar in place, what might be some of the things I would try to find out from people? And how would I want them to interact with me? So that would be my challenge and takeaway immediately, is to start and think about how some of that could play a part for you in this space. So when we talk about the tools that are available to us in terms of communicating, email is the number one that constantly comes up, whether it's a small organization, large organization, whether it's public, private sector, charity, whatever it might be. Everybody seems to rely on email one way or the other. Why do we do it? Well, reasons that you've got on screen there. It's reliable. I send a message, most of the time I'm aware that it's going to be received. I've got the opportunity to review it before I even send it, which is very useful for me, to be honest. I'm sure we've all done that, where we've typed an email, read it back and thought, no, I know how that could be read and how that could be interpreted. I'm going to do it slightly differently. So it is an opportunity for us to review what's going on. We can automate processes. So I can make my communication really, time efficient for myself. I could put some time aside in the diary to type some messages, and then I could just leave it to an email client or service, and I know that's going to send these emails for me at the time I've decided it's going to happen. So it's a great place to be. We can target mass audiences at once. So we think about, sending an email communication. We can send it to hundreds of people all at the same time, so that we know we've captured people really quickly and really easily. And we can include a variety of different media types in there. So whether or not it's links to podcasts, videos, or whatever it might be, we can include all of that. But whilst there's all those benefits, it does come with a downside that we don't often look at. There's the massive potential for misinterpretation. You think about the number of times that you've seen an email and thought, well, this is how I'm reading that. This is what I think. You show it to somebody else and they don't necessarily see it the same way. So think about it from the people that we're trying to communicate a message to. How are they understanding that? Are they interpreting it in the way that we intended? Communication could just be blocked. So perhaps you've sent a message once and somebody's decided they don't want to hear from that individual again. They can block an email address or they can block a service so that we never get through to that individual ever again. It can be limiting in terms of finding out what the audience actually thinks. It could just be a one-way process. So if it's just landing in somebody's inbox and they weren't expecting it, it could be it's just going to be a circular, I'll come back to it. And I can guarantee the pressure of the day job will get in the way and they'll not necessarily look at it. So it may not even be read. And overall, it can sometimes be difficult to track results. If we're communicating to hundreds of people at the same time, it can be really difficult to keep tabs on that kind of data. And we might lose some of that information that would otherwise be really important to us. So as well as email, I'm certainly not suggesting that we switch email off and don't use it, because it's vital and it is a really good tool for us to use. There's major benefits in using things like social media, some of the examples that are on screen there for you now. But again, when we choose social media, it's thinking about what's the environment I want to put it in. Does it work for a LinkedIn audience, which is obviously predominantly made up of different organisations, charities, professionals, that kind of thing? Is it the kind of message that would suit on there? Is it more suited to Twitter? Is it something that I can just put a very quick message out there and I can ask people to link through to a website? Is it something that's more suitable for Facebook? Because actually when people are at home of an evening, relaxing, scrolling away on a phone, that's the kind of place that they'll be looking for it. Or is it something that lends itself to Instagram because it's more visual and because it sits in that space where I can really demonstrate and show people what it is that I'm communicating to them about? Different video communication tools such as Vimeo, YouTube that exist out there. So perhaps it's something we can prepare a promo for, something that we could actually, again, we could link the two together now. So we think about Twitter, we could put a short message out there with a link onto a video to get people to find out more. So it could be something in that space that we want to look at, but we need to think about what that visual message would be. Or we could do something like have live discussion, such as what we're doing today. And again, today we're on Zoom, but it could be MS Teams, it could be Skype, it could be any other variety of tool that we want to explore. Or imagine a world where we could actually bring people back together again. I know that seems sometimes like it's really far away, given what's been going on the last couple of years, but there will come an occasion where we could bring people together again in a room to have a conversation, where we can all discuss the different kind of challenges and things that are going on for us. So there's a variety of different tools and techniques, and it's not necessarily just about using one or the other. It's about thinking about what links with what. So if it's, use the example of Twitter again, it's a call to action because I'm offering a webinar, maybe the link to register is within there because it's really quick. I can see how many people are looking at it. I can see the analytics that are on there, and I can understand that. And I can see how many bookings I'm getting. So we've got that live and instant feedback. We've got that two-way process in place. So it's about linking things all together rather than one message or relying on one particular area for our communication to work. So what about your call to action then? Well, the day was called, or today's session was, a one-page communication plan. And ultimately, it breaks down into these 4 steps. So the first things first is define your audience. Who's actually getting the message? And are there any differentiating factors within the group? So what I mean by that is, is define your audience, define the different sectors of your audience. Is there a variety in terms of age ranges? Is there variety in terms of different backgrounds? Whatever that might be, but it's about understanding who's likely to look at what. Is it email? Is it social media? Is it a video? Is it a live conversation? How's my audience likely to interact? So it's defining that stuff up front. Secondly, perhaps most importantly, what is it you actually want to happen? So you've sent your communication. What does the result look like? Yeah. What does everything feel like at the end of it? What should we be seeing people doing? What's different now that I've sent that communication out there? Thirdly, think about how you're going to review success. Remember, hitting send or submit or just uploading something to a video sharing service is not enough. We need to think about what success is. How do we review it? How do we know? And then finally, what feedback do you need? What is it that you need to get back from other people to tell you that this is working? How are you going to be able to see it? How are you going to be able to understand it? If you can get that sorted first, so before you even send the communication, before you even start and think about typing it, writing it, however you're putting it out there, think about what is it that I want back from people. If you can define that first, the rest of it in terms of this plan will come together really easy for yourselves in terms of those steps. So the final bit from me, it's the wrong slide that's come up there, so I'll stop sharing on that particular point. But the final bit from me would just be to say, so what are you going to do this afternoon? What changes can you make today? So we've talked a lot about different tools that are available. We've talked a lot about, different processes that you could follow. We've talked about that instant feedback, that opening up of two-way communication. If you could do something different this afternoon, what would be the key thing that you'd start and play with? What would you start and do differently as a result? So just my final question out to you before we open up a Q&A session.
I think it's to basically think what it is, what the audience were basically trying to target need, and like you said, what they use. For example, if it is teenagers, maybe it's creating a reel on Instagram or a TikTok video or something like that, because you know that they'll be more interested in it instead of sending an email. Or if it is you kind of reaching more older people, maybe is it email or a mail shot. I think you've made it clear that there's different types of communication for different people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's always a fascinating one. And again, I'm sure he'd be delighted if he was here, but I'll use my teenage son as an example. I hideously sent him a text message as opposed to something on WhatsApp, and was royally rebuffed for that, because nobody sends text messages, which I just thought was the same thing. And I don't understand. But again, understanding that grouping and the way that works, that's absolutely fine. I still live in a place where I think Facebook's amazing, whereas everybody's talking to me about TikTok and Snapchat. Yeah, so it's about understanding what's right. So yeah, what's the tool that's right for that audience to get it out there? So yeah, that's a great one. Any other points, anything else that someone's going to do differently after today, or start and think about a little bit more?
I think, Andy, for me, and I think that for a lot of people out there as well, it's a challenge of communicating the same message, but in different ways to different audiences.
Yeah.
And in here, I'm sort of thinking about, I know some of the people we communicate with, they may have low English, low literacy skills, but it's making sure that actually that message gets out to them too.
Yeah. Absolutely, and perhaps something more visual, so maybe a video message, something like that. That sort of is more pictorial, whatever it might be. But it is thinking about tailoring that message and what that might look like, because it's about really understanding that audience and then think about what do I need them to do, get that sorted, and that's most of the battle done. It really is.
It's Madge here. I think that's really important in terms of identifying your audience and how you're going to communicate with them. But one of the first things I'm going to do, I'm not the marketeer, I'm just standing in for her today, but one of the first things I'm going to go back and say to her is that we need to do more videos. It's just crucial to do that.
Absolutely, tell that story, isn't it? So I think that's another thing, and we will be talking about that actually on the next one. Next one, I'm running around networks and things, is about being a storyteller.
Yeah.
And telling that story. I really I do apologise for my dog. And the ones, that are really sort of showing people sort of, this is the impact that you have. This is the difference that you make. This is what it's about. This is what it looks like. That absolutely, is vital.
Absolutely.
Really valuable.
Andy, this isn't so much a learning point, but I think it's something actually that I observed yesterday. So yesterday, it's a bit of a story actually. So yesterday at about 11:30, I was copied into an email regarding business. And it was really a query that had come through. It had been sent out to another 10 odd people. And it was a query that could have waited until the following day. There was actually no need for me to have been copied into it at all. But the fact that this email landed at, gone 11 o'clock last night, and, with emails being on your phone and everything, it sort of came there. And immediately my thought was, oh my goodness, why doesn't this person, if they're working that late, why don't they simply schedule their email to come out at a more reasonable time? But thinking about this now, in reflecting on what I've just learned now, it actually really put me off that person and that organization. And my immediate thought was, can I afford to block this individual? If I block this individual, does that mean I also block the company and the organization? And it was a real pity, because I just thought, that's one individual who's representing their organization, who has sent out an email at at an inappropriate time. And that's really clouded how I view that organisation now.
It really can, can't it? And I think sometimes when you think about the scheduling of the message in its own right, I think that's a great one. As you say, with emails being on your phone, often, I'll get up in the morning, start my day with a cup of coffee, I'll have a look at my phone and scroll through my emails. I tend to think anything that's arrived overnight is not going to be important, because who realistically is going to be communicating with me at that time? There could be some really good vital stuff in there, but I'm not likely to spend time looking at it, because it's not going to be from someone that I, necessarily work with normally, or trust, or come into contact with regularly, that kind of thing. And that's just me, that's my viewpoint. But I would expect organisations to understand that of their audience, because people such as myself, that's what I'm going to think. If it arrives at 2 o'clock in the morning, how vital is it? Do I really want to look at that? Do I really want to give time to something like that? So it's a really good shout. It really can sort of cloud everything else, regardless of what's in there in the communication. Depending on when it's received, can absolutely cloud that overall message. It really can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do wonder, if perhaps going forward, if that particular organisation have some sort of a communication strategy which says, actually, you're fine to keep working if you really want to, but if you do, then please don't send out emails, or this is how you schedule them. Yeah, perhaps that's their communication plan.
And that's it done. It's as easy as that, isn't it? Just schedule it at an appropriate time.
Yeah.
Sorted, and then you'd have that right interaction with people. So yeah, I get that. Absolutely.
Do we have anyone else who's made a comment? Okay, thank you, Andy.
No problems at all. So I guess, is any other questions from people? Any windswept and interesting questions anyone would like to ask me? Don't feel under pressure if they're not windswept and interesting. They can be dull as well. We're quite happy with those too.
I have a quick question, if that's okay. I'll start it off.
Of course.
Yeah, the difference between communicating with internal and external customers. Because I notice now, especially with internal organisations, and I sort of feel like this is slipping over now for external organisations as well, where there's that familiarity that you have with internal colleagues. It's almost slipping over into external colleagues now as well. And I don't know if that's because of people working from home and not having that, pressure of being in that workplace where you constantly know exactly what your communication plan and ideas would be. Whether people are sort of becoming more familiar because they are working from home. I don't know. Is that something you've found?
It's certainly something I've seen, to be honest. I've seen this shift, but I also think organisations, there's been a lot of work, or certainly with the organisations I've worked with over the last sort of 5-10 years, a lot of the work has been focused around what their culture is, and what it feels like to be part of that organisation. So, I've worked in a variety of different industries, from media and telecoms, through to construction, but all have been really concerned about actually, we want it to be an engaged workplace, we want it to be happy, we want it to be friendly, we want people to really feel like they belong here. And as that culture grows in an organisation, you do see that start to grow outside in their external comms, be it to customers or external clients, or external customers or groups or whatever that might be. That same sort of culture starts to come across. I do think there's been a difference, certainly in the last 2 years, because of as you say, people have been working from home. There isn't anybody that's been unaffected by the pandemic in one way, shape, or form. Even if it's just isolate, if you're ill, that kind of thing. So everybody's been through that. So I think there's that shared view now that probably wasn't there before. And I think that, allows us to be perhaps a little bit more personable, and that little bit more personal with people when we're communicating. But again, just like anything we were saying before, it's thinking about who is that audience though, and how are they likely to take it. But yeah, I think because there are so many more links now between us, because people have gone through that, big event together as a nation, certainly you're starting to see organisations, sort of, I was about to say cashing in, and that's completely the wrong phrase, but, sort of really understanding that shared view that people have got now, and life's easier in that respect together. Yeah,
that's really interesting, that is. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions that they would like to ask Andy? As I mentioned earlier, we've got a real guru here, so now's our opportunity.
And there's that pressure again. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, actually, coming back to it, Andy, whilst people are thinking of questions here, realistically, so when do you stop saying Happy New Year? What stage is it appropriate?
Do you know what? I knew you'd come back to that one. I guess from my point of view, I'm going to go with tomorrow, because that puts me halfway through, about halfway through January, and I should have spoken to everybody by then. Although, just to point out, I think, is it third Monday in January? So is that next week? That's technically known as Blue Monday. It's a day where it can seem really long for people, so perhaps just check in with people and be nice on that Monday, I would think. So maybe stop saying Happy New Year this weekend, but maybe make sure we check in and make sure everyone's all right on Monday next week.
That's great. Thank you.
That's as good as it's going to get, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
My mum used to say that you say Happy New Year to up until you've spoken to everybody. If it's the first time you've spoken to them, for that year, you say Happy New Year. So however long it takes.
I like that, Madge. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My challenge then I have to remember that it's New Year, so I'll remember that one.
Yeah, I mean, it does just feel like, are we getting to, I don't know, a week now where it feels a bit jaded to be starting off every email with Happy New Year? I had to stop myself yesterday when I thought to myself, have I already wished this person a Happy New Year in a previous email? So, yeah.
You can't feel jaded. It's a full year of opportunity ahead. Don't feel jaded just yet. Come on.
Absolutely. All right. Does anybody else have any questions for Andy? Andy, I've got another quick one, if you don't mind, please.
Yeah, go for it.
You mentioned forums and group forums, particularly online, as a way of communicating as well. And I have to admit, I mean, it's really quite challenging sometimes, isn't it, to engage everyone on there and to get the feedback as well. And I know, for you as well as a trainer, because you're seeing a blank screen, aren't you, really? Or you're seeing yourself on the screen.
Yeah.
So do you have any tips on how you can engage people more and get that feedback from them when you're delivering something remotely?
It comes down to some of the stuff we've talked about today, actually. So one, think about your audience. Who is it you're inviting online? So are people comfortable being online anyway? Are people happy to talk on video calls? Are they happy, to share opinions in front of others that they've not met before? So think about the audience. But also, that what's in it for me factor, I can't stress that enough as to around how important that is. So if you're going to invite somebody to a forum and you're asking them to give you feedback, why should they? So what will they get out of it? Is that, and I don't necessarily mean that you need to, give people a cash reward for turning up to a call, but it's thinking about, sort of what benefit can there be from them sharing, and what's the knock-on impact. So it's about really being clear in your communication and invite to that session, that people understand that, your participation in this session, your feedback, your views, opinions make this difference. This is what it drives. This is what it does. This is what you're going to be able to create for people moving forward. So I think it's that, clarity of information that you send up front. In terms of, when you're on the call, when you're running it, let's be honest, particularly on any online session, there's always going to be that awkward silence. And my only advice with that is just embrace it. If you're going to ask a question that's going to go quiet for a little while, just let that silence roll for a little bit, or have a dog that will fill it in for you. But let that silence roll a little bit. Just let that, let it build a little bit, and it will feel more uncomfortable for others. And they will happily start talking when they realise you're not going to fill the gap for me. So that's usually the number one rule, I think, with any delegates that you've got on a meeting, is they will fill the silence for you, regardless of how awkward it feels for you. I guarantee the silence feels longer to them.
I like that idea. Right. So I think using that, let's be silent.
I've said too much, haven't I?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Right. That's really good tip, that is. Anyone else? Do we have any final questions whilst we have Andy with us?
No questions. I just think a massive thank you, really, because I think a lot of these things we know, but it's when you have someone like yourself, Andy, like explaining why it's so important and why methods of communication are the way they are. It's just a bit more like insightful. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's brilliant.
Thank you for that feedback, Serena. It's really, really interesting to hear that. Thank you.
I will send the cash to you in the post later on. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Actually, on that point, everyone, please, I have put a link to our survey in the chat panel. So please do click on that and complete that for us. And really, just to say from me as well, we've got Andy doing a further session for us next week. Is it next week, Andy?
It is same time next week, I think. Same time, same channel.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, let's see if we can start that one off as well with a Happy New Year.
Right, challenge accepted.
Yeah, absolutely. And that one is going to be on developing your partnerships and networks. So all I'm going to say to you is thank you so much for joining us all, everyone, today. And please do join us again next week. Make sure you do sign up for that nice and early. They do get booked out really, really quickly.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the go.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Enjoy the rest of the day.
Bye.
Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.